We'll give people just a couple of minutes to jump on. Hello and welcome. At the Millicent Rogers Museum, we are located on ancestral lands of the Tiwa-speaking people, known today as the Red Willow people of Taos Pueblo. We strive to deepen our relationship with the Red Willow people through collaboration, while acknowledging and honoring the complex history of the Red Willow people, past, present, and into future generations. We express gratitude to this land and to the Taos Pueblo elders and ancestors who have stewarded this land since time immemorial. So welcome to Millicent Unplugged, Pastel Painting, a Stroke of Pure Pigment. I'm Karen Chertok, the Director of Education at Millicent Rogers Museum. Joining me tonight is my friend, photographer, author, speaker, and museum volunteer moderator, Sarah Francis. Millicent Rogers Museum has hosted the New Mexico Pastel Society each spring for 4 years now. And each year, the content seems to hold a new perspective or technique, a fresh and vibrant unfolding from winter to spring. We are pleased to welcome guest pastel artist Nicholas Tesluk, Nancy Silvia, Marilyn Drake, Sandy Marvin, and Clare Scott, all award-winning pastel artists committed to sharing, teaching, and learning through the arts. I'll put their websites in the chat if you would like to get us started on the conversation, Sarah.
I sure would. This is a totally exciting opportunity to revisit pastel artists, as it's been more than, gosh, almost 2 years. And so I start off with thinking, well, let's talk Mary Poppins. What did Mary Poppins do? Well, her sidekick was a chalk artist on the pavement. And in many cases, that's all we know of pastel, but it's not really pastel. And so it occurred to me, and I want to ask Nicholas to start us off as something of a historian of pastels. What actually is the stick of pastel? What is it made of? And tell us about several different kinds of pastel, won't you?
Surely. The misnomer is that many people do call pastel chalk, and chalk is made of gypsum. Gypsum is mined, and it's used as fertilizer, is used as drywall, and of course, the chalk that we are all familiar with in schools, where the teachers would have us beating those erasers together, and we're all breathing that gypsum in. So, but when people call our media, the pastel media chalk, pastel is that we use in art, in the art form, is quite an expensive stick of pigment. And it's pigment that's mixed with gum tragacanth and just enough gum tragacanth to make a dough. And then it's rolled into little cylinders. And as I always point out, it's like the Gary Larson Far Side cartoon where God is rolling clay into snakes and saying, boy, these are a cinch, which probably means why we have so many snakes in the world. But the pigment is pure, and it's only enough gum tragacanth to hold it together. And then it's hardened into a stick, cut into about 4-inch lengths, 3 to 4 inch lengths. And we use either the side of the pastel stick or the end of the pastel stick. We can use the end of the pastel stick to draw, similar to drawing on a chalkboard, or we use the side to do what we call painting. So we like to refer to our pastel works as pastel paintings. Sometimes people call them pastel drawings, but it depends on which side of that you're on. But we like to call them paintings because the pastel art is an opaque art, unlike watercolor, where it competes pretty well with oil painting. So we like to, and acrylics are basically another opaque art. So we like to think that framing our pastel works under anti-reflective glass, so you're no longer seeing your reflection in as though you're looking in a mirror when you're looking at a pastel painting, and framing it to the edge without matte makes it into a pastel painting. But yes, the pastel and the pigments that are used are from all over the world. Pigments are either earth pigments like iron oxide, which is a rust, or ferrous oxide. Rust makes a red. There are different chemical forms that they make pigments with, and those are there's blues and reds. We talked a bit in my talk about pastels, about the toxins that used to be in pigments way long ago. Nowadays, all of our pastels are made toxin free. There's no poison in them, as far as I know. As long as you're not using pastels from 20 or 30 years ago. And so it's relatively. Go ahead, Marilyn.
Oh, I was going to say, I have some of those older pastels that I don't ever eat them. It's just that I don't put anything on my hands either. So I might be absorbing things through my fingertips.
Well, the cadmiums that they were using, even, 15, 20 years ago, made gorgeous yellows and orange and reds. But since we are in close contact with the pigments themselves, unlike an oil painter who's usually using a brush and not actually touching the paint, it makes for it's better that we don't have toxins in the pastels now.
The pictures I have up behind me, the back plate, those are Marilyn's. The previous ones were Nicholas. And I'd like to invite Claire. Would you speak a little bit about your interest, where you came from? Most people, if they're thinking about becoming an artist as a younger person, they may think watercolor, or they may think oil paints, or the ease of acrylics. They don't think pastels right first. How did you come to this medium, Claire?
Well, I think actually I did think it was easier, naively, because I was watching my art budget, and I knew that the advice had been to purchase the most expensive, valuable art equipment that your budget would allow. So not super fancy French pastels, but good quality pastels. And I didn't have to buy brushes. So I just thought all I needed was a surface to paint on and pastels. So that's how I came to that conclusion. And I also really love the idea of color. And pastels just allow you to have such rich and lovely color, and different values, lights and darks. And it just seemed really natural to just buy color. And that's kind of what I did. One day when I was really deciding I wanted to, leave my full-time job and become a painter, I had a bad day at work, and I got in the car and I drove down to Terry Ludwig's pastel studio here in Denver area. And I just took one of his boxes and I just picked out all the colors that I liked. And that's how great. I started. Yeah.
The backplate I have of your work, those two pieces are what I would call fugitive and subtle in their color. And yet, here's some of your abstract work that makes the color pop. You work in two stylings, and as do most of the artists. And I think that this talks to the value, the color values. And as Nicholas was saying, that they're made of all different sorts of things that bring absolutely wonderful brilliance of color. And Marilyn, I wanted to pull up one of yours right now, um, a, that I thought was just quite striking. And tell us about your use of color and obviously a both a cool and a warm palette.
Well, I think that any of us who use pastel, that's probably one of the initial things is you have all these beautiful pastels laid out in front of you. You don't have to be mixing things together. They're just all there. And because I generally, all my figurative things, I work from life, I'm kind of trying to follow what I'm seeing in front of me to begin with. And then trying to create the composition and which colors kind of complement each other. And I have all those color wheels. We all have little tools that help us along the way. So I don't know exactly. It just comes to you somehow. It just flows.
Sarah,
Yeah.
I want to circle back just really quickly to the idea of why somebody chooses pastel as a medium, because I know that Nancy's been exploring kind of thoughtfully what brings a painter to the medium of pastel and what are some of the stories. And so I thought Nancy might want to comment on that.
Well, pastel is a medium that people come to from so many directions for so many reasons. And I've been a lifelong painter. And early on, I was painting abstract oil paintings and, large scale. And then I had a, a life change where I had to give up working for about 10 years. So when I came back to being able to paint again, I didn't have a big space. I didn't have a big studio. I didn't have the time to devote to setting up an oil painting session where you have to lay out the colors and mix the colors and work for a certain amount of time and then clean it all up afterwards. And if it's in your house and the solvents are smelly, there were so many reasons why I couldn't work in oil paint at home. But pastel is an immediate medium. All your colors are there. There's no setup time. There's no cleanup time. So I could, if I had a spare hour to work, I could just walk into the room, work, and leave. So also to go outdoors to paint, you can paint in oil paint very easily as a plein air artist, but I thought, well, this is handy. I can just take a little box of pastels and go out and sketch, and it just evolved as a medium that appealed to me and I could handle. I like to draw, so pastel classically was more of a drawing medium than a painting medium, So graphically, it was exciting to be able to draw and have color also.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Sandra, I wonder if you want to talk about what brought you to
Oh
pastel.
dear, you're showing those.
Talk about journeys to pastels. Yeah, I think it speaks to that work is amazing, Nancy.
Well-
And it speaks to identity and how we see ourselves and how we express through the arts. And I think it's an amazing project that you're working on.
Well, thank you. I've been painting landscape mostly for the last 30 years, but I like to draw people. I like to draw animals. And recently I just fell into this idea of doing some self-portraits. It's a function of age. It's also a function of who's the handiest model that you have. You can, all you'd have to do is look in the mirror at yourself. And also, with the cell phone, it's great because you can you can record several versions of your image, and those help to make your final composition accurate. But these self-portraits, I've done 4 of them, and I think it's going to be a series because I can't stop exploring them technically and emotionally. So that's where I'm at with the self-portraits.
They're really good.
I'm calling the series Being and Time. That's from the philosopher Heidegger.
Well, there is certainly a Germanic feel to those pieces, without a doubt. So I see the philosophy coming forth. But we haven't heard from Sandy, and I've got to jump in here and say, these 2 pieces off your website are some of my favorite of the landscapes, because they're not what you expect. They're empty space, and it creates a dimension that is so different from what one sees in traditional pastel. And so I want you to tell us about your perspective.
Okay, well, I'll start with a little bit of how I got here, how I came to pastel. I was a calligrapher for many years and full-time, and then I was shown a pastel painting, or several of them, by a calligrapher friend of mine who was taking a class, and I was just blown away by the color. And I'd been working in black and white for most of my working life, primarily, and I wanted to get into that color. And so I think in terms of my perspective, I strive to find a different point of view. I like to do things that are a little different. And I do a lot of still life, and I do a lot of, these are completely covered. I do a lot of vignettes, and I think my aesthetic, people tell me this all the time, and I think it's true, is kind of Asian. People get that feeling from my work, and I like the simplicity of the Asian aesthetic. And I think my calligraphy comes through in the line work and my composition. So the perspective part is just kind of looking at things and trying to find an interesting, different way to look at them. So, and when I work on still lifes, I'm working with several media now, and actually, Nicholas, I'm trying to make pastel somewhat transparent. So a lot of times, like in those still lifes that you had on, you can see the drawing, because I like drawing, and I like seeing some line, and I like seeing the different layers. So the one on Sarah's left, I guess, is a self-portrait. So Nancy, that's my self-portrait. It's a little bit different.
Sure, yeah.
But I like to combine these different media.
Right. Beautiful.
Thanks.
Can I just add something? In the evolution of pastels, it has really evolved, and one of the key things that's happened is the surfaces that we get to work on now are a lot different than, I mean, the older, things that we see in museums, the Degas and the other artists that worked in pastel were working on paper, and often the paper wasn't anything. It's amazing that it's lasted. It's not archival. They had colored papers that faded, and so therefore the artist painted with colors and worked with the surface they were working on. And now you see it in a museum, and the colors may not be what the artist intended because the background paper has changed so much. But with the advent of these sanded papers that we have now that are archival, a lot of times you can, I mean, if you wanted something transparent, you can wet the pastel. You can take a brush with just plain water on it, and you can just fill up space, and you can, it's so versatile. I'm just amazed, and I periodically think, oh, maybe I should try doing, oils or something, because I like working with the brush. But often what I do is I use the brush on my pastel painting. It's either to brush off something I didn't like, or I wet it and I can do other things with it. So I think I just wanted to throw that in.
Thank you. That I wanted to touch on, and I'm going to ask Nicholas about this. The pieces I have of yours up, Marilyn, right now speak to something old. As you said, something antique. And of course, the medium does lend itself to that sort of a topic for, and now Nicholas, let me find the ones of yours. This series of diners is fascinating. Do you have more?
That's part of my Route 66 series. I didn't have more architectural things, but I have like one of the sunsets you showed earlier is I actually live on Route 66. I can throw a rock and hit it. It's only about 200 feet from me. So and Route 66 is such a historic road that I enjoyed having different not only the architectural things like that, but the anything that has to do with the road. And I've got one smaller painting of a lamppost right outside on Route 66 down towards Edgewood that I did early on too. So yeah, it's a fun series because there have been so many books and movies and everything done about Route 66 and how classically historic it is. So yeah, that Route 66 diner, it's still looks just like that. It's on Central near Albuquerque. The Standard Diner has changed hands now, so it's no longer the Standard Diner. It is I think Ranch Cafe or something like that. So, but yeah, I did it a few years back. So yeah, there's a lot of retro, which is really what really makes Route 66 neat, is that they've kind of kept some of the history in many of the areas, many of the states that Route 66 owns. And it's always fun.
It's my impression that the colors on these two pieces must be just incredibly vibrant.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, how big are they?
The Route 66 diner, the one that's on the left, is 12 by 24, and the standard diner is 16 by 24.
So they're quite large.
Right.
Interesting.
I usually like to work in 2 to 4 or 2 to 3. So yeah. So but yeah, they're the Route 66 diner is showing right now in Madrid at a gallery there. But it's when I first wanted to do that painting to try and get the neon to look vibrant, I thought, well, I could just use pastel pencils and do it that way. They didn't work. It didn't have the brilliance that I really wanted to just glow from it. So I ended up sharpening the edges of pastels to get the colors and the lights that really stand out.
So I want to comment about these a little bit because I'm looking at the blue sky, and you've really captured a time of day. And when I first saw it, I thought, oh, this has so captured twilight. But then I look at it more, and it actually looks more like sunrise. We see these blue skies in New Mexico all the time. And if you're up at that time of day, that would be before the sun rises all the way. It's just twilight, the lights are still on. So I'm curious, Nicholas, if you painted those skies from your mind's eye and from memories, or
It
possible
was
you painted them plein air.
no, I never do plein air, but I did take photographs of both of them in the evening, and it was that time between the dusk time,
Mhm.
but the skies in New Mexico are incomparable.
Yeah.
So it's one of my favorite colored pastels. It's an ultramarine uh, Rembrandt ultramarine medium blue, and it just stands out so well when used in evening skies like that. And I
Mhm.
love evening. So, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, and those particular
Yeah,
two. So, thank you.
you're welcome.
In the chat, we have an admirer who
Yeah.
says how much she loves your pieces. And
Thank you.
if I can move Claire to you, because you have some, and in these two abstract pieces, you have some of that intensity that Nicholas was just talking about. How are you achieving, for instance, that red stroke? Wow. That's quite amazing, and I am admiring the intensity of part of that piece, and then it goes very fugitive in the background, almost as though this is a storm and there's a break in the hurricane and something ethereal behind it.
Well, I always hesitate to tell people how a painting came about because their story is more real to them than what I had. So the painting with the red stripe is actually as part of a series that I did um, where I zoomed in on another piece. And these were prayer flags that were tied in the foothills of the Himalayas that I was on a trek. And so they were all sort of tattered. And then I had a larger painting of the more representative of the prayer flags. And then I took a small piece of the image and zoomed in, not only zoomed in, but then made the painting actually larger. So it's just, I think the beauty of pastel is it is very forgiving. You paint similar to oil paint, kind of the opposite of watercolor, where you lay your darks in and get your dark areas in, and then your midtones and your lights as you go. And then you can go backwards. You can put those darks back on. You can use your brushes and brush off and get back into it. So you can go back and forth, and try to figure out how to get exactly what you're going for. And then, I don't know, I like red, so it's hard for me not to have a painting with red in it. Sandy knows. But the other thing I was impressed with is, I don't know the names of my colors. I don't know what red that was. I don't, because all of my pastels have the papers torn off of them. And I didn't really paint in oil paint, or I painted in watercolor many, many years ago, but I don't know a cadmium red from a different kind of red. I just know, oh, that works really well. It's warm, or it's cool, or it's the right value. So I'm just really kind of right braining how I'm choosing the colors, because I'm not paying attention. I mean, I know turquoise and I know blue, but I don't know the variations along the way. And I think that's kind of freeing because I'm just choosing the color. And then in the other painting with the yellow in it, I really just was trying to capture cottonwood trees, but I just love that idea when you stand under them in the fall and you see those little blue sky holes. And so I wanted to get the movement, but I know I didn't want to paint leaves. And then I had this other kind of idea in my head, wanted to try to paint abstract informed paintings that were, or abstract paintings informed by landscape, but not have a horizon. So I see a lot of abstract kinds of paintings, but there's still that horizon. And so I wanted to try to see if I could do an abstract that seemed like it had, plants in it, or trees or mountains or whatever, but no horizon. So that's kind of what I've been thinking about trying to do with the colors that I like. I hope it helps.
I'm interested that you don't worry about what the color is, that you let the piece tell you, oh, well, let me pick up this one or let me pick up that one. It's like little jewels that
Yes.
you have them laid out, and like the terrific the old-fashioned thing that about the grandmother would recount about the jackdaw who would come and steal the silver for the nest because it was just something that was so shiny and so beautiful. And of course those are. And this leads me to ask Nancy, because as your pieces in the current work that you are working on, my goodness, the intensity of the color and the feeling on the one side, and then the softness that you have brought in on the other side. But it looks to me like there are actually quite a number of layers there, even though we don't know. And so I'd like to steer the conversation toward layers now.
So what do you want me to say here? Now, the blue one came about. I was feeling blue because, people never used to say they were depressed. That was a clinical word. My grandmother and my aunts would say, oh, I was feeling blue. So I thought, I feel blue. I'm gonna make myself blue.
I wonder if we could
Well,
jump in with a question that came up about the size of Claire's paintings that you were just showing. A question came up. Claire, what is the size of your painting?
The green and red one is it's either 14 by 14 or 16 by 16. I can't remember. And then the
Okay.
other one is 12 by 12. And I do like to paint squares.
Yeah.
Squares are fun. Yeah.
If I can continue here, I want to talk about you're saying that getting away from the horizon line, and that's something that interests me particularly, and that the subject matter doesn't have a set way of forming itself in the environment of the piece. Just like we talked about Sandy's with an unusual line, and then her abstracts where there were that it went, the piece didn't have pigment over all the piece, so it had almost a feeling of watercolor. And so, ladies, can you start a conversation about going off the edges of the page? And I suppose I should show this one of Marilyn's again, where the lady with the roses, she is not in any way centered. And so it's a very unusual composition to the more staid, simple horizon line. So ladies, tell us about your formatting and design.
Well, let me just say, I am very fortunate. I'm in a studio where we have a drawing group every Wednesday, and I run the drawing group. So we have models come in, and that's a really wonderful thing for me because I get to start a new painting every week pretty much from a different model. But on the downside is that there are other people who show up. And so sometimes it's just luck where I have space to put my easel and I'm left with like, what kind of composition can I make from where I happen to be standing? And I use tools similar to what I use when I go out plein air painting. I have the little thing that's sort of gridded and I can hold it up and find like, should I go in more and make, should I do a full figure? Should I go in closer? And my background is in graphic design and commercial art. So I'm also often thinking, I look at that painting now and I think, and there in that empty space is the place where the headline would go and there'd be some copy in there. but it is still trying to capture something about the effect of how the model was posed, what they were wearing, and there's all that decision making at the very beginning when you start out. Sometimes I'll do a full figure. There are people who come to our drawing group who are fascinated. They always want to do the full figure because they really like adding in the shoes. Sometimes, I may do the same thing and look at the model and see this whole thing, and I just see how it can be how it can become a painting, and then I can add background to it and put things like those red flower. She had the red flower in her hair. I added red flowers next to her because there was just this kind of dead space where the side of the chair was, and it's like, well, this will go to make that composition with the red flowers on the left, and then the little bit of her red skirt sticking out in the lower right, and then the red top of her dress leading up to that beautiful flower that she had in her hair. So hope that explains something.
Well, that's what I was hoping for, is that it showed extraordinary movement in the piece, that it wasn't static. And moving on to that, Sandy, tell us more about your portrait, and that's the one over here. Which one is it? It's this one.
No, the other one.
This one.
On your left.
You can't see behind you.
All right. Yeah. So, well, I picked a bunch of flowers from my yard. I started with an oil wash to create a shape that I could plant my picture in. So it creates a little bit of context, but it's just a shape. And then I just picked what was in my garden, and I don't want to just do a predictable still life usually. And so I like to do very quick drawing, very quick and very loose drawing. And I've used those, and then I thought, well, it needs to be a circle in here somewhere. So I went and got a round mirror that I had in my studio and took a picture of myself being reflected in that mirror. I put that circle in the still life with the flowers all around it. And then I put my face in that. People don't always realize that that's what it is, although I named it selfie. I'm actually holding my phone, which was red, to take the picture. But I just look at the shapes that I want, and I like for the context to go off the page and create an exciting shape by itself, and then combine the line work of the drawing and the color of the pastel.
I can just add my process. Sandy and I have painted together a lot, and I am beholden to no tans. So I often will start, almost always, with a small thumbnail of very limited values maybe three at the most, 3 or 4 with markers. But once I figure out my notan composition, then I go ahead and use that to base my painting on. And it's worked pretty well for me. So I'm going to stick with it. And then there's this handy app called the Notanizer, which is really pretty nice. You just use your phone and take your photo that you're thinking about painting, and you run it through the Notanizer app, and you can gradate the values, but that will rule out a composition for me pretty quickly. So I like to see how my darks and lights are going to be before I start with any kind of color.
Can you explain that a little bit more, or somebody, about the notans for people who perhaps aren't familiar with that terminology?
So a notan is a Japanese term, and it's just the idea of only using black and white or two values to create a design on your frame. So I would always, on my sketch, I would always have a square or a rectangle of the same aspect that my painting's going to be. So, 3x4 or whatever. It's squares are easy, a square. And then I look, and I started painting outside. So this was a practice that I really got from plein air painting. And so then I look at whatever scene I'm doing, and you kind of figure out somebody talked about the grid they use, but then I look to see just where my lights and darks are. And I will draw in my little thumbnail just the lights and darks, and see there whether or not I've got a composition that works for me. And then after that, I'm able to add more layers of lights and darks, but I really want to make sure that that's pretty solid. And then it took me a long time to learn to translate that to my painting surface, because I would have many of my plein air painter friends look at my notan and then look at my painting and say, Claire, that's not the same. And I always like my notan better. So the practice has been to just get better and better at translating that little sketch onto my paper. And it's been a nice way to come up with a composition that I can depend on.
Thank you.
That's a great definition. Thank you. That explains a great deal of your methodology. That's kind of you to reveal it to us. I'd like to circle back a bit to more traditional landscapes. And so I have pulled up those two of yours. And did you say originally that most of your work has in the past been landscape work?
Almost all of it. Yeah, I very, very rarely include figures. The painting of the cattails and the melty water is a plein air painting. And the mountain scene is a studio painting. And I just was better for me to paint outside. I was able to not throw laundry in the washing machine or get interrupted. I could just focus and paint. And so learning to focus and paint really allowed me later to move into a studio and be less distracted. I'm pretty distractible. So anyway, yeah.
We have a fancy planet. It's hard not to get distracted. And so again, moving, Nicholas,
Yes,
to the classic work that you do and the intensity of color and the here the emphasis on an horizon line, that it is not what we expect, that it is a sliver of the painting. And I think you're known for this, as well as the extraordinary New Mexico clouds. Are they all New Mexico, or do you
They're
travel
all
around?
New Mexico. In fact, they're all near my house. So I usually I do get my 10,000 steps in by walking every day in the summertime. And sometimes the sunsets just appear. They're right there waiting for me. And I take photographs. Again, I don't do plein air on it, but I've I've got hundreds of different sunset photographs, and I'll usually basically, like, on both of those, I took about 3 or 4 different areas of the sky, and then basically try and pick out the area that seems to lend the composition, to try and guide yourself through the up into the clouds and then over without drawing you out immediately. So and again, on the left one, I'm using that same ultramarine blue that I love. So again, similar to what you were speaking with the Japanese artwork, some of the skies, just as they fade from really dark up high to light below, is basically like some of the watercolor works that you see in a lot of the Japanese works. And just the brilliance and loveliness of the oranges and I'm not a landscape artist. I don't do a lot of green work, but I do love the oranges and yellows and turquoise and ultramarine blue that you get in sunsets. It's glorious.
And yet, with the extraordinary color in the sunset, which is, of course, completely true in our Four Corners area, there's a good deal of detail in the small sliver of land and bushes and trees as well. Perhaps it's not as evident in the reproduction here in the video, and yet you've spent quite a bit of time with tiny little details in those areas, have you not?
Yes, especially the one on the left, right across the highway from me, right across Route 66, is like a little ranchy type place, and they've got a lot of John Deere tractors there. And so I tried to fit not so much the John Deere tractors, but there's a pickup truck and a few things that you can't see too well in this image. But I sort of like that subtlety to where people have to kind of look closely to see what's in there. So and detail in the clouds too, and I've had cloud paintings where I painted the clouds as I saw them, and then maybe I'm imagining it, but a lot of times I'll see faces in the clouds, and they actually show up in my paintings, and it's like I often wonder, are people noticing that too? So, but yeah, it's like it's sort of like a Rorschach design, I guess. So.
Well, we are getting closer to the end of our program, and I was hoping that Nancy, you might talk a bit about the current show at the Millicent Rogers and your participation, and the folks who have traditionally come to the museum. Is it every spring?
This is our 4th year that we've done it, and it shifts a little bit, but it always seems to be this sort of vibrant outpouring from winter. So yeah, there are 99 paintings in the show. Sorry, Nancy, I'm jumping in on this. It's also a 2-part show, which I wanted to clarify. 66 of the paintings are at the museum.
Yes, and 33 in our virtual show.
Yeah, and you
virtual...
can see them on the website, or soon to be. I'm not sure if that link is functioning right now on the Pastel Society website with the whole show, but we do have 66 of them at the museum.
When I was asking Nancy, we were not acquainted before. Was this your first participation in the show, or did we just miss each other? So I was asking about your participation.
I'm not sure if Nancy's audio is working. So
Nancy's been in several of our shows.
she's in several of the shows and is in gallery.
She's what's known as a distinguished pastelist. And I've explained that a few times, that in order to become a signature member of the Pastel Society, you need to gather a certain amount of points. If you get 1 to 3 paintings into one of our national shows, you earn 3 points. 1 to 3 paintings, even if it's 3 points. In order to become a signature member, you have to accrue 12 points. You can accrue 12 points by also winning awards in shows. Like if you win a first place award, you get 5 points, second 4 points. Even one of the sponsorship purple awards is 1 point. And so you can accrue your 12 points earlier if you're getting awards every year. But if not, it takes 4 years to get 12 points. And you have 8 years in order to get that. And once you become a signature member, then you have, there's another step up that you can achieve, which is called the Distinguished Pastelist. And we don't, there's several signature members in our society, but not that many distinguished pastels, because it's a little harder to achieve. You achieve it by volunteering for the society, by having articles written in magazines, art magazines. You can also get it by winning awards in other societies' national shows. And so once you've accrued enough points for that, you become a distinguished pastelist. You get a little plaque and everything. So it's great. And Nancy is one of our pastelist members. So she's been
Thank you. I appreciate the additional information. I should say that Sandy and Claire are part of the Sync Gallery in Denver, and that has been an extraordinary small gallery that has proved to have legs over a period of time. And we're glad to be able to go down and see good things each time we go. We have a bunch of questions, and Karen, will you tell us about what's in the chat and what things we need to address?
I think that we have touched on most of the questions through the conversation that are in the chat at this point, and I do want to thank all of our guest artists. I wanted to actually circle back really briefly to this idea about landscapes and clouds. And I wanted to touch on something that I found quite interesting. So in listening to you and Nicholas kind of talking about the landscape and the Sarah and the horizon line with New Mexico painters, regional painters, it tends to be mostly about the sky. You're painting the sky is what you're doing. And which makes me think also of when I was looking at I don't know whoever had a chance to look at Claire's website, but there's a cloud society that Claire is involved in, that she's a member. I saw that. It was so compelling. It was like this little mini rabbit hole. I was like, Cloud Society. Wow, because I'm actually in the midst of looking at Georgia O'Keeffe's clouds for a different program. I was like, Cloud Society. So I looked at that website. It's very interesting. I did not know that existed. So in a roundabout way, through this pastel conversation and through looking at not only the artworks, but learning that, I was happy to come across that Cloud Society. Claire, can you just talk a little bit about that? Because that was so interesting.
So it's an international society, and you can sign up for, the Daily Cloud. You can submit artwork of clouds, or they'll bring up, sometimes the Daily Cloud is a famous painting that an artist included clouds in. They have they have an office in Switzerland, where they have submitted scientific papers to name a new cloud, but their main office is in England. And when you join, you get a letter that says, "Here's your," and it feels very English to me. This lovely letter, very official looking. And then if you read the small print, it says, "And you're welcome to attend our meetings. Just please write your member number across your forehead when you come to the meeting." And it's just sort of buried in this letter. So it's a great group, and people submit clouds from really all over the world. And it's a great way to learn about clouds. So I would encourage anybody to check out
Claire,
their
Claire,
society.
is that society the one that has that lovely little book about clouds, and it names all the wonderful different, like, what is it, venticular clouds or renticular clouds? There's
Lenticular, yeah.
yeah.
I'm going to type it into the chat in case anybody's interested. It's called cloudappreciationsociety.org. So, oh, thanks. Anyway, so much painting of clouds that happens, and so much expression of landscape. I just thought that was really an interesting, little adjunct to this conversation. But again, we are getting towards the end. I want to really thank all of you for participating in this conversation. I really am thankful that you're willing to share about your work, your practices, and the history of pastels, your own and in general. Enchanted Colors, the New Mexico Pastel Society, and beyond exhibition runs at the Millicent Rogers Museum through June 2nd. And then there will be a relatively quick change to the signature show, which is from June 7th to June 30th. So if you get a chance to come by the museum and see that show, is also a show and sale. All the artworks are for sale as well, supporting the artists and the museum as well. Also, the museum is, as of this week, open 7 days a week. We are no longer observing winter hours, so we're open 7 days a week, 10 to 5. And Sarah, do you have any parting comments or?
Thank you. Ladies and sir, would you be so kind as to put your website in the chat so that people can spend a moment if they would?
I did that at the beginning.
Oh, we
I
did.
typed them all in. Yep.
Well, then nothing more to say. We just want to look at art.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.
It's been
Bye-bye.
fun. Nice to meet you all.
Nice meeting y'all.
Nice to meet you.